Seems to be one of the most enjoyable places everybody likes to explore is in the anterior. I'm not sure I understand the fascination because that's the scariest place to do surgery. Because if you make a mistake, everybody sees it. But we're going to talk about anterior, not so much the surgery, but what we find biologically and physiologically. And usually we deal with one or two choices, and that is either altered active or passive eruption. And when I'm done with this part of the presentation, I think you'll feel real comfortable to know exactly which is which. And again, the nightmare of nightmares, as far as I'm concerned, is we only have 1 millimeter of protection. That's it. So when I see a gingivectomy done in the anterior, the reason it upsets me is because we're removing many times really good protection, which is a connective tissue. But in essence, today we all want to kind of learn to do something quickly. We want a weekend course, and we got all these gadgets such as, for bone sounding, and then we're going to talk about for doing surgery in the anterior. But none of those procedures or those tools take into account a human being. They're all based on a number. And if the number is wrong, the patient loses. But you'll never know because you never saw the problem. So I try never, and I never have really done a gingivectomy. And this patient was referred to me from a friend up north, actually just sent me the photograph and said, "What do you think? Is this a pyogenic granuloma?" Now let's go back to our original when we were doing our diagnosis. Remember, we take probings and then we'll go ahead and then measure the clinical crowns. So if I was measuring the clinical crowns here, this may be 9 or 10, this would be 5, this would be 6, this would be 9 or 10, this would be 10, this would be 10. So in essence, I'm looking at this and saying there's way too much tissue on the tooth surface here. It is not a pyogenic granuloma in this 13-year-old. It's the fact that he's cutting his tissue with floss. So we, in essence, need to raise the tissue to mimic the other side. So if you did clinical probings of the crowns, the clinical crown, you would come up and you would get measurements and say, oh, this is off 3 millimeters. Oh, this is off 4 millimeters. And then I still would reflect the flap. I would probably do a little gingivoplasty here. I wouldn't take this, and I would contour this to give a proper zenith, but I would still reflect the flap. Now, let's look at this closely. If we did this procedure, see the frenum? We would cut away the small amount of gingiva and expose the muscle fiber now as a gingival collar. You can see it right there. So if you cut this away, you cut right through anything that's present and you now have the muscle as the attachment. There would be no more gingival collar. And I can assure you that's a very big mistake because over time that can pull the papilla apically. So here's a surgery being done. It's taken off of Facebook. And there is no biologic semblance to this surgery. It is a surgery. It is a crown lengthening, but it has no bearing on biology or physiology. First, he did a full thickness flap at least 10 millimeters high, maybe more. There's no reason to expose all that bone. The other thing that periosteum does, it protects the bone because it has nutrients in it. So why you would want to expose the bone and dry it out during your surgery makes no sense. So one, he's violated a critical biologic understanding here. Two, he has over-festooned the interproximals so that when the tissue lays back, it's going to lay down into a little concavity, and we may end up with what's called a gray hue at the line angles because the tissue is not bulky there. This is of particular importance when you're doing restorative. Because if you're doing a crown or a veneer and the tissue is a little too far lingual, you're going to see that gray hue. And that's not going to be you. That's going to be from the loss of bone thickness. So we're not very aggressive when we do festooning in the anterior. The other major problem we have is He's got about a 3 millimeter ledge here, which is why he will have relapse. People think relapse is because you don't take enough bone away between a CEJ and bone, and that's not true. It's because you have the wrong thicknesses of tissue. This is bone tissue, which is too thick, and then we'll discuss soft tissue. But in his surgery, he left a ledge here, and he's notched and grooved the teeth everywhere, but he doesn't know it. See, here's the problem. He doesn't have the knowledge to go with the how. He's just doing the how. But he doesn't understand the why at all. Everything in here is not biologically sound, and over time can be a problem. And when he places his tissue back, look, he's got 2 to 3 millimeters of thickness of connective tissue, gingiva, when it's only supposed to be about a 0.5 millimeter at the gingival collar. It's supposed to be knife edge. So when he sees relapse, as his tissue grows back, he's going to think it's because he didn't take away enough bone, which he did, where in fact it's because his flap was incorrect. This was a gingivectomy. This was done by the numbers, where he poked numbers and then just cut the gum away. Now let's compare a biologic surgery. First of all, the bone is created, a parabolic architecture is undertaken. Also, we only see about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters of bone exposed. Then you can clearly see the periosteum present. And now, because we didn't cut away the gingiva here, we don't have a problem with the muscle, because there's the muscle. If I would have done a gingivectomy, that muscle would have been attached there. And when it goes back, see the muscle? Imagine if I went in here and just cut this away, because that's what the dots told me to do, and now the muscle would be butting up against here and be actually the collar rather than the gingival collar. It would be a freedom collar. And over time, that would be a problem. But also, look at the knife edge margins of tissue. Look at the parabolic nature of the tissue. The tissue and the bone must mimic each other.